Life aboard an aircraft carrier is adventurous, but also very tough and very exhausting. When sailors misbehave, they can be punished and even end up in jail where they must survive on only bread and water. The concept of putting people who have been found guilty of very minor acts in solitary confinement and providing them with nothing but plain bread and water for several days at a time is more than a century old. When sailors in the lowest 3 pay grades misbehave, ship's commanders have the authority to place them in bread and water detention as a kind of non-judicial punishment. It originates from a time when warships had hulls made of wood and sails. This punishment is only given to those who have committed the most serious offenses. Back in the 1800s, a sailor who committed a small offense would be required to climb the mast and remain in the bitter wind for a predetermined time. This may be rather unsettling and lonely for the sailor, but it was also known as the perfect time for a sailor to catch up on some reading. This punishment method was referred to as mast heading. Another punishment was keel hauling. Keel hauling was considered one of the harshest punishments a sailor might face between the 1600s and the middle of the 1800s. The term keel haul means to haul under the keel of a ship. The procedure consisted of the victim being pulled under the ship in a harness 3 times, the intention being that the punished person would live. Because the ship's hull was often overgrown with barnacles, mussels, and shells, keel hauling could cause significant injuries. Flogging was another form of punishment. Flogging is a prevalent kind of punishment that has the potential to be fatal for a man. Sailors who committed significant or little transgressions were frequently flogged in front of the crew by being flogged with a cat o' nine tails while being attached to the mast. The knots in the cat o' nine tails tore flesh away from the backs of the sailors, inflicting wounds that had the potential to grow septic. To prevent this from happening, officers would frequently put salt into the cuts that were made during the flogging, which was a procedure that caused further anguish. In 1862, following recurrent complaints from sailors that dictatorial officers were using the lash unfairly, Congress decided to abolish the practice of flogging. However, ships still had to spend months at sea, which is a significant distance from law enforcement, courts, and prisons. Hence, ship captains insisted on keeping the special authority to summarily punish and imprison crew. In those days, bread and water were considered a more progressive and humanitarian alternative to the traditional practice of flogging. According to the laws that were in place for the Navy in the 19th century, commanders had the authority to impose it for a period of up to 30 days at a time, and they also had the option of attaching heavy iron shackles to the neck of punished sailors. The fact that bread and water are still used long after the days of tall ships and daily grog rations exemplifies the demands placed on the military judicial system. Soon after, sailors began to grumble that their superiors could be just as despotic with bread and water, or what crews jokingly referred to as cake and wine, as they had been with flogging, and there were numerous attempts made to put an end to the practice. In the year 1882, one Secretary of the Navy advocated for its abolition by stating that it meets the disapproval of the department. In 1921, another Secretary of the Navy attempted to convince Congress to do away with it by stating that utilizing it to instill discipline and order has the opposite effect, and less have wise officers resorted to it. The punishment was, at one time, based on standard operating procedure in the British Navy. However, the Royal Navy abandoned its use of it in 1891. Even though United States ship commanders successfully kept bread and water on the books, the severity of the policy gradually diminished due to criticism. As a result of new laws introduced in 1909, punishments were capped at 7 days rather than the previous maximum of 30, and sailors could no longer be flogged. In 1951, the maximum period was reduced to 3 days. In the 1980s, a mandatory medical evaluation became part of the process before the imposition of the sentence. You might think that bread and water confinement is an old practice that isn't used in today's world, but you would be surprised to know that it was still actively used in Navy ships up until 2019. As a result of the horrible treatment that the sailors at this command have received, more than one sailor has decided to leave the Navy rather than remain in the service and have to deal with any more of this crap to pursue their career goals. But how strict and harsh is modern-day bread and water confinement? According to the laws of the Navy's brigs, sailors serving in the United States Navy who are assigned to the bread and water regimen are allowed to consume as much bread and water as they want 3 times a day, regardless of how much bread or water they consume. Although inmates on bread and water are not required to be coerced to conduct an intensely physical activity, they are permitted to participate in an hour of stretching and minimal exercise in his or her cell. In addition, sailors often have access to a selection of religious texts to read when confined to the brig. The good news is that sailors will no longer have to serve their time in confinement by eating bread and drinking water. Why? Because it has been abolished. As of 2019, it is against the law to punish someone by locking them up in the brig and just providing them with bread and water to eat. A comprehensive revision to the Uniform Code of Military Justice was enacted. This revision brought hundreds of modifications designed to make the system fairer and more efficient. The regulation that permitted ship commanders to force low-ranking sailors to subsist on diminished rations for up to 3 days at a stretch, consisting of only bread and water, has been repealed due to the new law. Commanders in each armed forces branch will continue to have the authority to punish less serious infractions in various methods, but not the bread and water confinement punishment. There are a lot of people in the Navy who have been looking forward to its abolishment. However, some lament the passing of a maritime custom that they consider to be practical and efficient. The views posted on online forums where sailors can vent about life in the Navy are diverse on the subject of bread and water. Some people believe that spending 3 days in the brig was preferable to either losing pay or being forced to remain on board a ship while it made a port call. Others saw the punishment as demoralizing and the mark of a poor leader. According to those knowledgeable in the law, eliminating bread and drink will not rid the military justice system of all its problematic legacies. The authority over legal proceedings continues to be in the hands of commanders rather than an independent judiciary. That'll be all for today's video. Thanks for staying tuned. Let us know what you think of the topic in the comments.